Welcome to the An Echo of the Past channel. I am Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, King of Italy, Protector of the Rhine, and without a shadow of a doubt, the greatest military leader and statesman the world has ever seen. Today I will tell you the story of a man who was born on a small island and conquered almost all of Europe. The story of a genius who rewrote the map of a continent, created a modern legal system, and showed the world what true greatness can do. Get ready for an epic account of the rise and fall of a man whose name has become synonymous with military mastery and limitless ambition. Be sure to subscribe to An Echo of the Past channel, because where else will you hear the story straight from the mouth of the man who changed the history of the world. Give a like if you love stories of true greatness, and get ready for the most amazing autobiography of all time. I am Napoleon, and this is my story. I am Napoleon Bonaparte, and I was born on August 15, 1769 in Ajaccio, Corsica, an island that had just come under French rule. Fate itself decided that moment. If I had been born a year earlier, I would have been Italian. But no, Providence wanted me to be French so I could change the destiny of the greatest country in Europe. My father, Charles Bonaparte, was a nobleman, a lawyer, and a politician, a man who recognized the power of changing times. My mother, Letizia Ramolino, was a woman of iron will who taught me that strength of character was more important than a title of nobility. Napoleon, she told me, the world belongs to those who take it. What prophetic words! I grew up in a family of 8 children. I was the second son, but the first with a genius mind. Even as a young boy, I led my siblings into battles with clay soldiers. I organized them into formations, planned strategies, commanded attacks. The other children played. I studied the art of war. I remember one particular moment when I was 7 years old. I was building a fortress out of snow in the garden of our house and organizing a defense against the attack of my brothers. "Here we will build the cannons," I told my younger brother Joseph. "Here will be the gunners, and we will lead the main attack from there." Even then, I saw the terrain with the eyes of a warrior. Corsica was an island of contrasts and passions in my childhood. I still remembered Pasquale Paoli, the hero of Corsican independence, who fought against the French. My father initially supported Paoli, but when France won, he joined the victors. He taught me the first lesson of politics. Sometimes it's wiser to bend with the wind than to break against it. At school in Ajaccio, I excelled in mathematics and history. While the other boys were memorizing, I was analyzing. I read about Alexander the Great, Caesar, Hannibal. Why didn't Hannibal conquer Rome? I asked my teacher. Because he had no political vision, I answered myself. Even then I understood that military victory without political wisdom is futile. My childhood was not easy. We were noblemen, but poor noblemen. My father tried to provide education for all of us, but money was always a problem. I wore shabby clothes, ate simple meals, but my mind fed on books and dreams of greatness. At the age of 9, a moment came that changed my destiny forever. My father announced, "Napoleon, you're going to France to study. You've got a scholarship to military school." Imagine that moment, a little Corsican boy about to conquer continental Europe through education. On December 15, 1778, I left Corsica for Altum, where I was to study French before entering military school. I was 9 years old, and I already knew that I would return as someone else, a man who would change the world. The boat trip to France was my first adventure. I stood on deck and watched Corsica recede. "Goodbye, my island," I whispered. "When I return, I shall be famous." The waves crashed against the prow of the ship like the ramparts of a fortress I was one day to conquer. I was a stranger in France, a short, dark boy with a strange accent among the tall, blonde French nobles. They laughed at me, called me la paille au nez, the straw in the nose, because of my name, Napoleon. But I thought, laugh, one day you will kneel before this name. French was a problem for me at first. I wrote letters home full of mistakes, but my spirit remained indomitable. Maman, I wrote to my mother, I am learning their language, but I will never forget who I am. I am Bonaparte, and one day the whole world will know that name. I spent only a few months in Autumn, but I learned the basics of French culture, and, above all, I learned to hide my Corsican pride under the mask of a French gentleman. Even then, I understood that success requires adaptability. Then came May 1779 and my trip to the Royal Military School at Brienne-le-Château. I was 10 years old and entering an institution that was to produce French officers. I didn't know it was training the future Emperor of Europe. I remember my first day in Brienne like yesterday. High stone walls, strict teachers in black cassock, students in blue uniforms. This is where they'll make a soldier out of me, I thought. But I'll make more of it. I'll make a legend of myself. In Brienne, I wasn't like the other guys. While most of the boys were enjoying games and small mischief, I was thinking about battles, campaigns, and strategy. I was 10 years old, but my thoughts were already turning to grand plans. My teachers thought I was quiet and a little strange. When others were inventing mischief, I was studying books on military tactics and history. I read about Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Hannibal. I was fascinated by how they conquered the world and the mistakes they made. I wore a simple coat because my family didn't have much money. Teachers called me Little Corsican, but I showed them that power is not in the wallet, but in the head and the heart. I didn't take my classmates very seriously. They were mostly the sons of noblemen who thought the world was at their feet. I knew I had to be better, not just because I was an outsider, but because I knew I was destined for a fate that would not allow mediocrity. My years at Brienne taught me discipline and hard work. I practiced fencing, horsemanship, and math every day. My hands learned to hold the sword firmly, but I planned entire wars with my head. And there was another important moment. I met the people who shaped me. Some teachers admired me, others hated me, but they all knew one thing: this boy would be someone great one day. In 1784, I transferred to the elite École Militaire in Paris. There was no room for the little boys from Corsica. It was a place where geniuses were born, and I wanted to be the greatest. In Paris, I learned the harsh realities of court and French society. I was short, dark, with a strong Corsican accent. I was often rejected or underestimated by the nobility, but I knew it was only the weakness of those without strength. I studied strategy, mathematics, history, and the art of leadership. I was obsessed with perfection. Every day I asked myself, how can I be better? How can I outdo everyone else? Paris was also a city of extremes: splendor and poverty, wealth and poverty, glory and betrayal. It taught me that politics is a game where those who play best win. And I wanted to be a champion. In 1785, I graduated with honors from the École Militaire. I was a young officer, but I had plans in my head that would change Europe. I believed the whole world would know my name. After graduating from the École Militaire in 1785, I was appointed second lieutenant of artillery in the Paris army. The beginning of my career? Not much. But my ambition? Infinite. I knew the road to power would not be easy, but I was prepared to walk it with determination and intelligence. France at that time was divided, a society under pressure from economic problems, discontent, and unrest. The revolution was already in the air. I knew that a new era was being born now, and I wanted to be there to lead it. In 1789, the Great French Revolution broke out. Many nobles escaped or were executed. The army was in disarray. And me, I saw an opportunity. I began to show my skills in Toulouse, where I helped put down a counter-revolutionary uprising. My tactics were quick, precise and ruthless. Wherever I went, things moved. "This is no ordinary officer," people began to whisper. "This is someone with fire in him." In 1793, when France was threatened by a coalition of European monarchies, I was given command of the Italian army. I was only 24 years old and already leading thousands of soldiers to fight for the revolution. The enemy wanted to crush us, but I had another plan. My Italian campaign was brilliant. I overcame the far superior Austrian forces with speed, courage, and innovative tactics. Victory at Lodi was my first great triumph and marked the beginning of my rise. During these battles, I won the loyalty of my men. They knew they would never lose to Napoleon. They called me the little general with the big heart, and I returned it. I never lost sight of my soldiers, never betrayed them. In 1796, I became commander-in-chief of the Italian army. My mission, to conquer northern Italy and drive the foreign powers out of it. It was a challenge I accepted with passion. My campaign in Italy was like a bolt from the blue. I defeated the Austrian armies in a series of victories: Mondovi, Lodi, Arcole. My soldiers watched my every move with admiration and enthusiasm. I proved that I could combine tactics with courage like no one else. My style of command, a personal approach, quick decisions, unexpected attacks, and tough discipline. I was like an orchestra conducting a symphony of victory, but I wasn't just a warlord. I was also a lover of art, culture, and science. In Italy, I admired Renaissance art and began to realize that power was not only about war, but also about culture and education. My victory in Italy meant that I became not only a hero of France, but a legend in Europe. My name spread faster than the rumor of the storm. The year 1796, that year has gone down in my annals as the beginning of my dazzling rise. I was 26 years old and in command of the Italian army. The mission? To conquer northern Italy and drive out the Austrian and other coalition forces. Italy was not my enemy, but the stage on which I was to show the world what a brilliant warrior was. At that time, Italy was divided and under the control of various powers, the Habsburgs, Sardinia, and others. I came as a storm to sweep away the old order and pave the way for a new era. My campaign began at Lodi. I remember standing on the banks of the river Adda and watching the enemy lines. I knew I had to act quickly and unexpectedly. "Soldiers," I said, "today we will show that when Napoleon comes, there is no escape." We crossed the river in the rain and night, surprised the enemy and broke him. It was like lightning striking a peaceful forest. Suddenly, everything is in flames. Victory at Lodi catapulted me into the hearts of my men and into the hearts of all Europe. The soldiers loved me. I was with them every step of the way, sharing their hunger and their danger, and they were willing to die for it. Then came the Battle of Arcola, where I personally led 3 days of fierce fighting. It was like a chess game where I was the master of strategy and tactics. If I hadn't been so enthusiastic, I might have broken a few bones in the process, but what would a victory be without a little pain? The victory at Rivoli in 1797 finally broke the resistance of the Habsburgs in Italy. My soldiers, who only a few months before had stood in the rain and mud, became masters of the battlefield, and I was crowned the greatest genius of my time. But I was not just a warrior. I was also a politician and a diplomat. After the victories, I founded the League of Italian States, a society to protect the interests of France and my allies. Italy was on the road to unification, and I was the driving force. During these campaigns, I also discovered the beauty of Italian culture, art, and architecture. In my spare time, I admired frescoes, learned Italian, and even wrote poetry. Yes, even a warrior can be a romantic. My Italian campaign was like lightning, fast, precise, and devastating. In Europe, they began to whisper my name with both respect and fear. "Here comes Napoleon," they said, "the one who will change the face of Europe." And me? I knew that this was only the beginning of my story. A story in which I would be not only a conqueror, but the creator of a new world order. After the triumphant Italian campaign, I became not only the most powerful general in France, but an inevitable player in European politics. The year 1799 marked another turning point. I returned to Paris as the savior of the Republic after the coup d'etat of the 18th of Brumaire, which I myself led. There was no time for modesty. France needed a leader to return her to the top of the world, and I was that man. As first consul, I reformed the administration, the laws and the army. France was exhausted by revolution and war, but I saw the potential to build it into a modern state where the laws apply to all, where order and the power of the state are rock solid. In 1804 came the coronation, the moment I had planned as the pinnacle of my career. I received the crown from the hands of Pope Pius VII, but you know what? In the end, I put it on myself. It symbolized that my power came from me, not from the church. I was the emperor of men, laws, and military power. The coronation wasn't just a ceremony, it was a demonstration of my power. All the rulers of Europe came to bow, but they knew they were up against a man who would change the game. In my eyes, it was the moment when the warlord became the creator of a new era. My reforms were not confined to France. I introduced the civil code known as the Code Napoleon, which unified the law and laid the foundations of the modern rule of law. The idea that laws should be simple, fair, and equal for all was revolutionary. My code is still influential around the world today, but it wasn't just about laws, education, science, the arts. I supported all these areas. I believed that a powerful state must also be culturally strong. I set up lyceums, supported scientists, artists, and architects. My army grew into the largest and best organized force in the world. The wars I fought were swift and decisive. I used tactics of massive maneuvers, rapid movements, and surprise attacks that were often not dealt with by the enemy. Europe came to fear and admire me at the same time. My name spread like a storm. Napoleon meant not only victory but also change, revolution, rigor, and genius. But I also had enemies, not only in foreign countries, but also among my own advisors and generals. They knew that I was demanding, uncompromising, and that I did not forgive mistakes. But who would want to be sultan if it were easy? My dreams were big, not just the conquest of Europe, but the reformation of society, the creation of a European order that would last for ages, and I believed I was the one who could do it. My life was not just about coronation and reform, but more importantly about wars, which I fought with unwavering energy and brilliant strategy. I wanted France to be the most powerful country in the world, and I pursued this goal with a passion that did not allow for compromise. In 1805, 1806, and 1809, I fought several huge battles against coalitions of European powers that tried to stop my advance. The Battle of Austerlitz in 1805 was the highlight of my military career. There I saved the French army from overwhelming encirclement and crushed the Russian and Austrian forces like a chess master. It was the day I proved I was the greatest warrior of my time. Then came victories at Jena, Friedland, and Wagram. Each of these battles meant the expansion of my empire, Germany, Italy, Austria, all under my control. My code, Napoleon, became the law of the land, my army a model for others. But wars were not just about battlefields, it was also a game of diplomacy, espionage, and psychology. I could disrupt enemy coalitions, manipulate kings and dukes, and always stay one step ahead. My life on the battlefield was intense. Every day I commanded my men, watched over tactics, considered every move. I was everywhere, at the artillery positions, on horseback in the front line, in the tent with the map. My generals respected me, my soldiers loved me. I also experienced incredible moments of personal danger. I was wounded 8 times, once almost losing my life at the Battle of Aspen-Essling, where I suffered a severe shoulder wound. But I never lost faith, never stopped believing in my destiny. My victories also meant changes in Europe, the abolition of feudalism, the spread of revolutionary ideals, the improvement of administration and laws. And though many hated me as a conqueror, others admired me as a liberator. But the wars also exhausted me. As my ambitions grew, so did the pressure from the powers around me. Europe united to stop my campaign, and I knew the next chapter of my story would be filled with even greater challenges. The year 1812, my biggest and toughest challenge, I decided that Russia had to be under my control as it threatened the stability of all of Europe. I set out with a huge army, the famous Grand Army, on a campaign that was to become the stuff of legend. Unfortunately, even legends have their dark side. I marched east with more than 600,000 men, soldiers from all over Europe who were ready for victory. I felt unstoppable. Russia will fall like a house of cards, I told my generals, and I will be king of all continents. But Russia was unlike any country I had ever conquered. The Russian commander Kutuzov knew he could not compete with my army in a direct confrontation. Instead, he chose a scorched earth tactic, retreating, leaving behind burned towns and villages, destroying food stores. Our soldiers faced an endless journey across an arid, ruined landscape where there was nothing to eat, where winter arrived sooner than we expected. Plague, hunger, frost. These were my real enemies. When we finally arrived in Moscow, we found the city in ruins. The Russians had set it on fire to deprive us of our refuge. It was a trap into which I locked myself. Fewer than 100,000 men survived the Russian winter. Many of them died of frostbite, others of disease. The Eastern Campaign turned into a catastrophe that shook my entire empire. I knew I had to retreat, but even retreat was hell. Every step meant a loss of soldiers, equipment, morale. It was the toughest fight of my life, the fight for survival. When I finally arrived back in France, I was a broken man. My empire was bursting at the seams, and my enemies were going to take advantage of my weakness. After the failed campaign into Russia, Europe began to unite against me in the 7th Coalition. It was like all the dogs laughing against the lion. In 1813, I was defeated at the Battle of Leipzig, the so-called Battle of the Nations, where I lost most of my army. 3 days of fierce fighting, but even genius has its limits when faced with the superiority of the whole of Europe. In 1814, the Allied armies approached Paris. My own Senate has betrayed me. I was forced to abdicate on April 6, 1814, and take exile on the island of Elba in the Tyrrhenian Sea. Imagine, the Emperor of Europe relegated to a small island. But even there I remained Napoleon. I reorganized the local administration, built roads, reformed the laws. I couldn't help myself, but Elba was just a break, not the end. I watched from afar as Europe reverted to the old ways, as Bourbon Louis XVIII destroyed everything I had built. I can't let this happen, I said to myself every day. February the 26th, 1815, my bravest act. I fled Elba with only 1,000 men on the Inconstant. I risked everything. I could have been shot as a deserter or recaptured. But I bet on the love of the French people, and I was right. When I landed at Cannes on March 1st, 1815, the people hailed me as a savior. "Vive l'Empereur," they shouted. The army sent to arrest me joined me. Marshal Ney, who had promised the king to bring me in an iron cage, embraced me with tears in his eyes. On March 20th, 1815, I triumphantly entered Paris. My famous 100 days had begun. I was emperor again. I held the fate of France in my hands. It was the sweetest return in history. But once again, Europe united against me. Wellington, Blucher, all those whom I had already defeated, returned. I knew I had to act quickly, defeat them individually before they united. June 18th, 1815, Waterloo. The day that changed my destiny forever. It was the battle I was supposed to win. I had better positions, more experienced soldiers, more brilliant tactics, but fate decided otherwise. The rain the night before had softened the ground. My guns were stuck in the mud. Grouchy didn't arrive with reinforcements. Ney attacked too soon, and then Blucher arrived with the Prussian army. It was a tragedy in several acts. "The Guard is dying, but it is not surrendering," I shouted as I saw my elite troops crumble under the Allied attack. But even my immortal Guard had its limits. After Waterloo, I returned to Paris a broken man. On July 15, 1815, I surrendered to the English, hoping to be treated as a prisoner of war under international law. How wrong I was. Instead of a respectable exile, I was taken to St. Helena, a damned island in the middle of the Atlantic, 2,000 miles from the nearest civilization. It was a prison worse than any dungeon. On St. Helena, I lived under the supervision of Governor Hudson Lowe, a small, vicious man who made every day miserable. I lived in Longwood House, a damp, dusty house that was unworthy of a common gentleman, let alone an emperor. But even in exile, I remained Napoleon. I dictated my memoirs, thought about my campaigns, planned reforms that would change the world. I believed that one day I would return, the third return of Napoleon. But gradually my strength left me. The climate of the island was not to my liking, the food was bad, the medical care inadequate. I suffered from stomach pains that worsened day by day. In the last few months, I sensed that death was imminent. On May 5th, 1821, at 5:49 p.m., I breathed my last. I was 51 years old. My last words? France, armée, tête d'armée, Joséphine. France, army, at the head of the army. Joséphine. I died far from my beloved France, far from the battles and the glory. The official cause of death was stomach cancer, but I believe I died of a broken heart, a heart that beat for France, for glory, for immortality. I was buried on St. Helena under a willow tree that I liked to walk through, but even in death I won. In 1840, King Louis-Philippe had my remains transferred to Paris, to the Invalides, where I rest to this day as the emperor I was. My life ended in exile, but my legend is immortal. I am Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who dared to change the world and did it. My life was like lightning, fast, bright, and destructive. From a small Corsican boy to Emperor of the French, ruler of Europe and part of the world, I was a genius, a leader, a reformer, and yes, a man with flaws and weaknesses, but I never doubted my greatness. I love victory, but I have learned the humility of defeat. My campaigns have changed borders, laws, and the minds of men. I laid the foundations of modern Europe, even though I paid a heavy price. Whether people love me or hate me, one thing is certain. Napoleon Bonaparte will always remain a symbol of indomitable will, courage, and the desire for excellence. Thank you for listening to my story. Subscribe to An Echo of the Past channel, like and share to keep the legend alive. The past whispers, the future listens.